So we got people jumping in, but we got a few housekeeping items before we really jump in. So I will go ahead and get started with the housekeeping items. So on our agenda today, I'm gonna go over a few opportunities that we kind of talk about in each of the slides. A few housekeeping items. We're gonna have a Price is Right contest. So for everybody that's joined today, got the opportunity to win a gift card. And then we will dive into our topic of the day. So I'll start with opportunities, touch base on the housekeeping items, and then we'll dive in. So for those of you who aren't aware, we were able to get a DBIA system-wide membership. They actually changed the rules. They used to treat each campus as a separate organization. And this last year, they made a change to kind of allow CSU to join as an entire organization, which is drastically cheaper than every organization joining individually. So this is kind of the directions on how to join. I'll basically pull down the registration list, or really the attendee list from today, and I'll send this information directly to your email. So you can screenshot it now if you want, but I'll email out these slides as well. But basically, this will cover all the membership benefits for DBIA, which is a lot of times free or reduced registration fees to a lot of the training and a lot of their resources they have online, as well as reduced costs for their certification process. So a lot of value there. We're working on that with some of the other organizations, and we're also working on drastically reduced fees on the certification process. So more to come there. Some of the upcoming training opportunities. And Amy, you can correct me if my tentative dates are wrong, but I did make sure to put tentative on those. So we have maintenance construction. That's going to be next Tuesday at 1 p.m. So I'll try to avoid getting too far into that topic today. And this is maintenance and construction for the purposes of triaging, our legislation procurement laws. And there are separate definitions for maintenance and construction in accounting. And there's also separate definitions for maintenance and construction in building code. So those are going to be different and they will vary. This one's going to be specifically on triaging projects for the purposes of contracting and procurement. And then our next two CMAG connection sections are going to be the first-ish Friday of each of the next few months. I think Britain is working on the next one. And then upon popular demand, we are working on our law, design, and construction. And we're going to try to split it up into Northern and Southern California. So we're still working out the details on exactly when those are. But once we lock them in, we will be sending out a save the date flyer, probably followed very shortly by a registration and a calendar invite. So be on the lookout for that. And actually, I'm going to change my screen share real quick to our housekeeping items. All right, so for those of you that aren't familiar, I mean, many of you probably have seen this before. So for this listserv that we use a self-managed listserv because it's been impossible for us to stay on top of making sure everybody's like individual contacts are up to date. So I'll put a link to this in the chat. And the intent of this is basically anybody on this call can jump in and update the contact info for their specific campus. So if you have somebody on your campus that would normally do this kind of stuff or has access to that info, please shoot this link over to them and update with the current info. Let me drop it in the chat real quick. Because this is the starting point of what we'll send out. We also try to hit the other listservs, like we might hit the EFO, DFO listservs, might hit the procurement listserv, but for the most part for the affinity group meeting, which has a pretty wide breadth of people with procurement and construction management and planners and some other people, we like to keep this pretty much open to whoever wants to get this sort of information. And then we'll also send out some of the other resources like the DBIA membership and some other outside training opportunities will get sent out to this listserv. So again, this is just kind of an open form spreadsheet. You just add a row, delete a row. So if there's people that aren't there anymore, go ahead and update those. And then this is what we generally use to send out our information. All right, now jumping back over. All right, so minor cap limit. So does anybody know how the minor cap limit gets established? And you can either yell it out or throw it in the chat. And then the second question is, does anybody know what the current minor cap limit is? There we go. Got a few of them coming in. All right. So here is the legislation section that actually is what kind of triggers shifting to the minor cap limit. So back in 1984, whenever California contract law was first established or added into statutes, there was a specific dollar value. I think the first dollar value was maybe either $100,000 or $250,000. And for about 20 years, there would be a new amendment that actually changed the value in the code. And that resulted in it potentially becoming dated. Like, for example, our chalk legislation has a specific value that doesn't automatically increase. And now that value is tragically dated. So I think it was around 2004 is when they changed it from being increased automatically to being increased pursuant to section Public Contract Code 10108. And 10108 references another section that references a section that basically says the Department of Finance is going to be responsible to provide that value every 2 years. So I won't go into excruciating detail on that, but kind of the general consensus is that this points you to Department of Finance. And if you go to the Department of Finance website, they'll have all their bulletins for the year. So if you go to the even number years, so this one's it's one of the first bulletins that they'll issue. Usually they issue it in January. This one was a little late. They'll send out this budget letter, and it'll be project cost threshold adjustments, and it'll almost always be titled that same thing. And then down here, they'll issue the new adjustments for the various contract types that apply to different state agencies. So for this one that we're looking at for that 10108, that's our minor capital outlay project limit. So that 1103. And then one that we're going to talk about probably a little bit in our discussions is the DVBE SBE limit. So small business and disabled veterans business, where we can less formally procure projects with only SBEs and DVBEs. This section 10105, that's the section that establishes that. So although this says DGS oversight required for projects over this amount, that's kind of the primary reason that value was initially established. But then the government code that established the SBE and DVBE model also references, so it uses the same value. So if you ever want to know what the current SBE DVBE value is, that would be referencing this number, and then the minor cap is this one. And then the way that we kind of formally establish it is you'll see a bulletin from our office, January every other year, and in that bulletin, we'll list out what these new limits are. So you can always just go to our bulletins page, and there'll be a copy of this letter with the new limits that have those adjustments. So where this gets into fun, sorry, I made you guys go through a little learning exercise there, is so in about a month, we're going to have a new minor cap limit. So Price is Right rules. Whoever gets closest to the value without going over will win. So obviously we won't know who wins until it's established. So go ahead and I'll give you guys like 2 minutes to throw your guesses into the chat, and then I'll export the chat. And then in January, when we send out the bulletin, I'll send out who the winner is to this list. And then I put the older values in there just to give you a little more information if you want to try to extrapolate. I haven't found a set formula that they use, so it kind of varies. I think they have kind of a black box that they use to come up with those values. But yeah, curious what you guys think. Can anybody do $1 yet? $1, Bob? Come on, somebody's got to do $1. There we go. No, that's amazing. I do $2. All right. And while you guys are throwing those in, does anybody have any questions kind of on this process or these values? Because this kind of ties into we're going to be jumping into our open conversation, so we can start with this. Any questions on these values, the history of them, how we implement them, what they apply to, anything like that? Not that I know the answers to all those. All righty. Well, thanks everyone for playing. So yeah, I guess I have to throw my guess in there so I can document it. So let me see what mine's going to be.
How many people asked ChatGPT is my question. Like, that was probably a big thing.
All right, I should just do $1 more than somebody else, but there we go. All right, there's mine. All righty, and then obviously we can move around on topics. So I think some of the topics for today, at least one I wanted to kick off with, because I think this is one of the better ones where we already have campuses that are practicing it and have best practices and lessons learned to share. So we can start the conversation there, and then we can move into kind of other topics. So kind of what I just referenced at section 10705. That's what allows us to do less formal procurement for minor capital projects. Now, the way that statute's written is really confusing. So unfortunately, I had to go back to when the original bill passed and look at the legislative analysis and look at some of the previous guidance that the previous CPDC sent out. But when you go back into the bill analysis, our previous presentations, our law design and construction binder, you'll see kind of the same set of words as like less formally procure and administrative efficiencies. And really what it looks like the intent is for that section is for minor capital projects that they're fairly minor in both scope and risk, that it's going to add more administrative efficiency and be better value to CSU if we were able to less formally procure those. And so it says, when in the opinion of the trustees, not all the provisions of CSU contract law are required, then you may execute the project in accordance with this section, which means less formally procured, and in which case the only section within the 10700 series that needs to be followed is the OGC signature. Now, in most cases, it's going to make sense to do other things for a lot of projects. A job walk, a lot of times, is going to make sense because the contractors need to come out and look and measure and quantify, especially if you don't have a robust design and set of bid documents. They're really going to get all their information from the field. And then there's also a separate code sections that are outside of the 10700 series. So let me jump back to that slide. So 10700 that I keep referencing, it's this 10700 through 1105. This is California State University contract law. So it's basically saying minor cap projects, you can choose which provisions within these sets of provisions that you follow for minor cap, with exception of being signed by OGC. Now, this doesn't waive provisions outside of public contract code. So one of the more challenging things that campuses have on doing less formal projects is you still have to advertise via government code. There's a government code section that says every state contract has to be advertised for at least 10 days on the state contract register. So something creative that a lot of campuses have been doing for quite a while is the annual advertisement system for minor cap projects. So I guess show of hands show of hands or in the chat, how many of your campuses utilize an annual advertisement for minor capital projects. So I'm going to drop in the chat the link to the CSU portal on Planet Bids. And this is the link that basically aggregates, I think it already has just a filter built into it for all CSU projects. So if you ever want to look at kind of what your peers are doing, you can always go into this page and see what other things are being bid, or if you want to try to look at other documents. But you'll see in here, pretty much anytime I log into this, I'll see at least one or two campuses that have their blanket annual advertisement up. So I know this is one Dominguez Hills have been doing for quite a few years with Maria. Maria's on, and a few other campuses. So we can have some discussion on this today. And then I'm hoping to bring together a group of people that we can kind of work through what are the best practices and lessons learned from the campuses. What have we gotten in any protests? What were the merits of those protests? How did we overcome those? What's working? What's not working? To kind of establish an informal procedure. We definitely don't want to create a policy on a less formal procedure and then all of a sudden it becomes formal and you have to follow that exactly. But we do want to make sure that there's a tool of a clear way that it can be done, and then some guidelines on, hey, here's what's flexible and here's what's not. It seems like that would probably be valuable. So I guess, Maria, will you be willing to share kind of how yours has been working? And then if you had any lessons learned or best practices, I'd be curious if you actually had any, like at least email protests on any of the procurements that you guys have done through that method, and then kind of how those shook out, or just kind of what's your procedure on how you guys implement the process? Maria, are you on mute or are you just away?
Can you hear me? I don't know.
There
I'm on my phone. Oh, okay.
Sorry for taking on if you're able to.
No, no problem. I'm on my phone, so I'm like, I don't know if you're going to be able to hear me. So fortunately, no protests, but we have been very fortunate in that front. We do post our annual advertisement. As you can see, it was a little late this year, but we didn't have any projects earlier in the fiscal year. So we post our annual advertisement. If you click on it, we have developed a Microsoft online form intake form, and that is where our prospective vendors or contractors register to become a vendor, and they enter their license information and all the rest of the information that we require from them. It then, because it's a Microsoft online form, it keeps all of the information in the backend in an Excel form, which makes it really easy for us to say, hey, we have a project for a D10 license or what have you. And then we invite contractors that are
no time for lunch. It's like the line is around the corner.
Sorry, I heard somebody else speaking. Okay. And so we invite contractors that have the appropriate license and that are registered on DIR. So we do a verification that they are registered, and then we invite them to the project. And then the process kind of runs as normal. We have our job walks, they submit their bids. We've been lucky; it's worked out so far. We've been introduced to a lot of new contractors. We just awarded one small project with a new contractor, and it worked really well. And we actually saved like $100,000. So it was kind of great. It was a smaller, minor capital project, but but we are getting to meet new contractors. So far it's working really great.
Awesome, good to hear. And how many years have you been running this?
10. I don't know, maybe more. quite some time.
Wow. Okay. No, good. Good to hear. And then Sergio, did you say you were doing this at a previous campus for a little while?
Many moons ago, we were doing this. We used to call it the fast track minor cap. So essentially, we would put out an NTC, notice to contractors, covering all license classifications. And similar to what Maria was saying, we would have, back then it was a manual process. So folks would send in a letter of inquiry, or excuse me, a letter of interest. And we'd, depending on their license, the license classifications they were holding, we would add them to a list. My campus is considering adopting this next fiscal year. We would create something similar to what Maria was saying, but in Smartsheet, the general contractors would fill out the form and the questionnaire, interest form, basically. Depending on their classification, it would then list them, and we'll keep a list behind the scenes on license classification. And as projects come up, our design and construction team would go in there and basically use it as a sourcing list, invite all, invite some. And that's, I guess, one of the questions I want to ask. So if you have, let's say, 10 or 15 in a particular license classification, I would imagine, Kevin, that best practice would be to invite all to a particular job walk if you were having it, or so. Or if you don't do that, how would we best determine who to invite, who not to invite, so as to avoid any protests? So I could pose that question out to the group, but that was something we were discussing at the campus level.
Yeah, and that's a good one because I'll tell some anecdotes on a slightly different method here in a minute, but we had kind of that same challenge is where you have a pretty decent list if you invite all of them, and then you have 40 people showing up to a job walk and submitting a bunch of bids, then it starts to deteriorate the the efficiencies of the process. But then if you do it completely black box, then how are you going to explain when somebody sees an electrician that starts showing up on a campus, like, well, what are they working on? How'd they get this? And because all these projects would still be subject to PRAs. So I think that's where putting together our little think tank and working through the best practices. But since we do have the legislative authority, I wish the language was more clear. I think we can point to that on why we do the black box. But again, it's having a policy that we adjust that into, that we can then point to the policy and say, well, hey, here's our legislative authority, and then here's our policy. And then our policy says we can advertise to 3 or more of a pre-qualified pool or something like that. That would give us a little more weight if we had to entertain a protest. And then the other fun fact is there's nothing that requires us to entertain a protest. It's just that's also a good practice to avoid lawsuits. If we try to address a protest, and a lot of times protests are right. They show that, hey, this person made an error. They're non-responsive. It should go to me or this other person. And we look at me, oh, you're right. In which case it allows us to kind of correct course. But I think that is a good thing to know, is there's no statutory right to a protest, but there is some right to due process. So that's where we kind of have to fill in. It's like, well, how do we provide some level of transparency and due process without letting people just drag out every single procurement by complaining about everything?
Yeah, our concern was the general optics, like you mentioned, having, in the scenario you brought up, a specific electrician being on board, and then inquiries then originating from that sort of thing. So obviously the think tank, I think, should clearly help with some strategies on how to best to source. So I don't know, Maria, how is your team? Obviously there's the inquiry form, but how are you guys deciding who to bring on to bid, or do you invite everybody? I guess that's the question.
Yes, our campus has been inviting everybody because we discussed this before. And if you do not invite everybody, then it kind of, your blanket advertising, you're going against your blanket advertising, right? So you might as well do a public bid. So at least we have released it to the contractors that we can say shown interest, and we can have proof of those contractors. So until anything changes, ideally, if I was on this committee, Kevin, which I volunteer, I would like to have a pre-qualification process where we can have a specific pool of contractors for the year, so that we can just say, I need a specific trade list for pool these 5 and have them bid. That would be great if we can do that, and have vendor performance questionnaires at the end of the year and pre-qualify new ones or keep them on. But yeah, it would be great, because we did have one project where we got like 10 bids, which was unusual for a painting project, but it is because we had a whole set of new contractors. But it was great that we had all this new interest and new activity. But it does become a lot when you have 20 contractors show up to a job walk for like a $250,000 project. So yeah, so we have to think around, be more strategic around that area.
I think the advantage, or the benefit is we've addressed in this concept, we've addressed the advertising and solicitation, and we can move right to the list. It's, again, Kevin, that's where the think tank will come in and decide who we select. But that saving of time up front for the advertising is an advantage in this model. So
yes, Joe, I want to reiterate that one. You're right. And that is what has helped us speed up the process, is we can go straight to those contractors and be like, job walk in 4 days, and we don't have to wait for people to see it. So that has been a huge advantage and has shortened our bidding timeline.
I was analyzing our bid schedule the other day, and it looks like the minimum that a major cap bid can take, which the minors can't really go too much shorter, is about 31 days. Because you can't really do anything until you have that initial statutory period done. And then there's the cushion for kind of the pre-qual and RFIs and field walk and those other items. And by the time you build it up, it's about a month. So yeah, at least you get to cut off a few weeks of each of these. Does anybody else have anecdotes from a different campus? I don't know, Chris, did you guys utilize this at SLO?
Yes, we did. Jeanette Myers is on the line. Perhaps she can share the process, the mini bids list.
Yeah.
The guidance that I provided in the matrix, there were several campuses that did this. SLO is one of those. And some of the details that we're talking about here, do you go out to the whole group? Do you go out just to a few? Those are some of the nuances along with the bid opening procedures. I know for minor cap projects that varies, but there's some questions that I think if we provide some clarity and can boil that down into either templates into a policy, I think that'll really help. But Jeanette, Jeff, what's your thoughts on the process that Cal Poly uses?
We use pretty much the same process that Sergio was talking about. We do, however, only solicit from the list. Like we'll choose maybe 3 if there's a bunch of them, and we'll go out to that. But it works great. It does save time. My concern is that what if you don't get multiple categories, people in categories? So then what? Say AV, for instance. They've been vetted, they've been put on the list, and you got one. So that's something that would be interesting to work through.
You're saying low voltage type
AV, audio visual, say. Okay,
like C10 stuff or C7.
Yeah. Because we do have, MEPs on there, and but there are some that there's only one. So how do you deal with that? Because I always try to get as many different ones as I can, and I encourage people to participate. But sometimes you only get one.
Yeah, I would say in that scenario, then you advertise to just ensure that you've at least done your due diligence to source as broadly as you could. Mm-hmm. In those instances where you just have one in that particular category, it'd be wise, I think, to.
Yeah, the disadvantage of that is that kind of that extends the process, right?
Right.
If you go out, you wait and you only get one, you do your sourcing, you only get one. Now you got to go out to bid.
And you might get one again.
That's a very good point. So now you've gone out twice, and then it's
Yeah.
due diligence. When I think some campuses are going to have issues
Mm-hmm.
with getting certain contractors. And
Mm-hmm.
that's something to
That's
consider as we move forward in the committee.
that's where Kevin comes in and he draws up
Mm-hmm.
some policy for us to say, well, if you only have one, then you can go with one. And
we actually have that for much bigger work. So for those of you who have awarded self-perform work, I think you guys are familiar with the third-party like estimating system that we use. So even if we only have one bidder, and even with service agreements, there's always some clause that says we still needs to be competitively awarded. Now, is getting bids from other vendors necessarily making it competitive? Like, for example, if you just bid out to controls contractors, usually contractors can only sell, or one vendor can only sell a product to a certain region. And
Mm-hmm.
so they have agreements with each other that only one of them is allowed to bid. But if a public entity has the requirement of multiple bidders, they also have in their agreement that the other ones will throw in fake bids, basically collusion.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
it becomes a fake thing. So for self-perform work where we know there's not a lot of control over making it competitive is to do a third-party estimate. So for AV work, we have all the Crestron information. We'll probably even force them to buy it through our Crestron agreement. So we can do it. Our AV guys should already have that. We can do a takeoff for the materials. We can get a pretty good idea of what the cost of the labor is, and it might be a little bit challenged to come up with the hours. And maybe that's something we can add into part of the process if we have only one bidder, an option in lieu of going out to bid.
Mm-hmm.
We put together an estimate, and if it's within 10% of the estimate or something similar to like we do with the self-perform, then we can justify that, yeah, we've validated that this is a competitive cost, and they seem to be the only ones currently interested in actually doing the work.
Yeah.
And if they're trying to extort us and we do an estimate and says they look like it's going to be double, then we have to make that decision. Does it need to happen now? Is it going to cost us more if we wait? Or because if we go out to bid, waste 2 months and only have one bidder, and then everything
Mm-hmm.
costs more, does that meet the need? So yeah, that'd be interesting to explore.
What was the name of the company you said that we should buy AV equipment from?
So I believe we have a system-wide agreement with Crestron.
Crestron with a P?
Yeah, I'll put that in the chat.
I've never heard of them.
And part of their agreement is that they're required to sell the product directly to our vendors and contractors at our pre-agreed rates, which are generally better than what the contracts have access to. That's rare. Usually contractors have better discounts than we do, but I believe the Crestron discounts are actually better. So we've done that before. And yeah, the AV that should be in CSU buy. So I don't know. Is anybody else in the call familiar with using the Crestron contracts and how you guys have interwoven that into projects?
Yeah.
Yeah, and we also do have one, Kevin, with Key Code Media, who is also a reseller for Crestron.
Perfect.
Yeah, I thought Key Code Media was a little high, honestly. But I want to check it out. Thank you.
Yeah, so that was about 6 years ago when I was using that contract. So I don't know if there's a current version of it, but I can check with my AV guys and say, hey, what's our best our best system-wide contracts that we should point our campuses to at least be aware of.
Yeah, that'd be good because we struggle with AV. There's not a whole lot around here.
And then so similar to, where's my share button? There we go. So similar to the minor cap exemption for public bidding, we also have the DVBE SBE option. So I will kind of share my recent venture through that and then get best practices from others. So we've been doing a lot of electrical work at the chancellor's office, or we always have a need for little things. So we're like, it'd be good to try to find a handful of options. And since most of our work's pretty minor, the SBE DVBE option should be pretty good. This out of the way. So what we did to exercise that SBE DVBE option, and again, the limit is up to 461,000. I think was the number on the letter I showed earlier. That allows us to solicit bids from at least 2 DVBEs or 2 SBEs and award to one of them. And the government code in there, it starts with notwithstanding other provisions of the code. So it basically says that's all you have to follow if you're doing this, and it's to make it just a lot of benefit to SBE and DVB. It doesn't even say you have to award to the lowest. So you could probably use a best value type solicitation within that SBE DVBE model. And that way, if they're close in value, you can say, well, I'm going to go with the contractor that's a lot better, even though it's slightly more expensive, because at the end of the day, they're probably going to get it done on time and in budget versus just looking at the initial costs. So what we did to come up with our list to kind of start engaging with the SBE and DVEs was to fill this out and do just a search on the DAR website. So I'll drop this in the chat for those that just kind of aren't aware of it. And you can put in the region, the license type, and it'll come up with a list of contractors and their email addresses. And then you can send out a blast to those email addresses. Now, if you send out an email to 500 people, obviously you're going to get a bunch of garbage in return. So I think similar to what Maria and Sergio were talking about, using some sort of form, we actually put together a smart sheet form to say, hey, we're soliciting interest or people who are interested in performing work. And then here's the minimum information we need. So we just ask them for some contact info, their license, their DAR registration, what certifications they have, if they do design build or not. That's valuable to know. If they have an in-house engineer, because that can be useful depending on what you're doing. And then they can drop in any marketing garbage they want into this box as well. And then they submit that. So within a couple of days, we had what are we at now? About 108 people that responded to it saying that they're interested in doing work at our office. And then if we have a project come up, I think that's our next thing to decide is, well, how do we filter down this list so we're not soliciting from everybody? Or is that the fair way to do it? Solicit from everyone, maybe 15 will actually be interested, and then you engage with those. But technically with the DVB and SBE method, it's much more specific and uses that clause notwithstanding, which makes it kind of enables us to be a little more black box about how we choose, that there would be very little weight that any of these entities could have to challenge or sue us on how we selected, because really it says we can select 2 people and choose one. But obviously, how do we be as fair as possible and transparent in that process? But that's kind of the process we used to at least come up with the lists. And we haven't done our first project using this list yet. But are some of you guys doing something similar for the SBE and DVBE projects? Or a handful of you guys?
Kevin, can I say a couple of things?
Sure.
Especially with the small business DVBE. Hi, everyone. Yvonne Romo here. I think I know most of you. So one of our efforts is to increase the small business veteran-owned use. So what we've done is last year we did an event at Fullerton, and the year prior to that we did an event at SLO. The outcome of that event basically is a list of small business DVBEs that showed up to our events because they want to do business with CSU. I have published that list in CSNP, and you could actually drill down to like HVAC or painting. I just want to share this as a tool for you guys to also have in your pocket. Let me share real quick what it looks like. And I'll put the link on the chat as well. So it is under CSNP, and these are the 2 different expos that I'm talking about. What the list looks like. Does the Excel sheet shows up, Kevin?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So basically you click on it, it's going to be an Excel sheet that gives you all the data that we collected of individuals that showed up. Their name, their positions, company, the RGGS register, the areas of service, because some of them only are very specific regionally, and then the industry that they do. So you could go in there and just sort it out what you're looking for. If I heard it was a HECVAT, right? So you could just go in there and see, okay, we have one guy on this list, but at least it gives you another little tool to have in your belt. That was all I wanted to say.
Awesome. That's fantastic.
All right. So I'll put the link in there.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks.
So that can be one we can think about in the think tank is if rather than every single entity doing their own annual advertisements and their own shortlisting on SBE, DVBE, is there something we can do system wide that everybody has access to the same databases? Because it looks like just at the CEO, Yvonne and I have partially duplicated efforts, and we're doing the same thing across all the campuses. And I know people are obviously contractors are going to be very regional to their campuses, especially the small businesses. But we've also done interest surveys for other service providers, and we just say, hey, which campuses would you be able to or willing to work at? And that's a way we've been able to actually do kind of a system-wide reach, but still be able to impact specific campuses without a contractor having to commit to work at every campus. Here, let me try the link too. See if it works for me.
Yeah, I just tried the link and it opens up. Just make sure that you are on your dual secure and Cisco logged in, because it is behind firewalls.
Opened up for me, but I'll share it real quick. Yeah, I have that every once in a while. I can't even get into the CPDC website, which is fun.
Yeah, just make sure your Cisco is open, because sometimes it won't even let me go through.
Okay, cool. So it's these two lists, it looks like.
Yes, sir.
Awesome.
And then, and I'm going to take this as an announcement. We're looking to do another event in the coming year, 2026. Any campuses that may be interested in partnering up with us, please send me an email. I had to do that, Kevin. I had to.
No, absolutely.
Free marketing, man.
So we'll keep discussing through noon, but I do want to throw out there. So if anybody is interested in volunteering to be part of that think tank to work together on kind of establishing kind of either like minimum procedures or guidelines for either we call it the fast track or the minor cap or mini bid. We'll come up with an awesome name for it. I'm sure you guys will. Yeah, if you guys want to volunteer for that, let me know. I'll gather the names and then I can set up a kind of an initial kickoff for everybody to kind of meet and kick the can around, and then come up with a schedule and a game plan to put something together. I think Chris and several others have a lot already started, so it'd be a matter of just testing those ideas out of what's going to work and not work, potentially pushing out a few pilots, and then hopefully that'll be something we can use to help out everyone. Awesome. Looks like it's going to be a big group. Is any other anecdotes or questions kind of on the SBE, DVBE model? I think another question that comes up a lot that I can toss out there is there is a different value for projects versus goods and services. So there are separate government code sections that I think they're right next to each other that provides the bid limit for using the SBE DVB limit for goods and services, which I believe is currently $250,000. And then there's another section for construction, alterations, repairs, etc., that references that 10108 number. So that one actually increases year after year. So there are different values, but the general context of how that process works are very similar. Vaughn, does that sound about right?
Yes.
Perfect. All right. Well, I guess with like 10 minutes, who wants to throw out the next topic? Somebody's got something.
I have a question common for the group, mostly how other campuses are handling this. I see the benefit of, increasing our numbers, small business, DBE with the minor cap or construction related projects. But the process itself, we still have to adhere to the regular bidding process, bid opening, all of that. So my question is, I heard that there was a campus out there, I can't remember who doesn't do the entire putting a bid package together, having the job block, having the bid opening, going through all that process. Can you please confirm if we are soliciting strictly to small business and DBE for construction related work? Do we still have to conduct the entire process?
I can tell you, Maria, here at Fresno, that we do require that because it leaves way too much gray area if we don't have the booklet with the Division 1 and all that stuff.
Okay. So, So we do conduct the whole process. I just thought maybe the campus has been creative, came up with a process where, you issue a bid package and skip a bunch of the process, because at that point you're really just targeting small business DBE, which is difficult to do because your price is probably going to be higher. So I was just wondering if anybody had any creative ways around bidding construction for just small business and DBE.
My opinion from just reading through the statute is that all of the pieces aren't required, but a lot of them are going to make sense. Obviously, having a complete set of construction documents, even if it's the minor cap documents, is usually going to make sense for the minor cap projects. But as far as actually doing a bid due date and bid opening, I think that's arguable. But if you want to keep yourself out of the territory being accused of bid shopping, do you really want to ask for email proposals at different times? But I've seen that done as well, as if you just need two, you find two people that maybe have worked on campus, have them come out and do a walk separately, email you a proposal, and you get to choose one, especially since you don't have to choose the lower one. It would be a little harder to get accused of bid shopping unless you're going back and forth via email saying, hey, I want your best and final offer and stuff like that. But that would be a good one for the think tank, is from just a risk management perspective and transparency. What's the level of informality that's appropriate to stay out of the gray area where it looks like we're just letting contracts to the same firm, or get accused of anything that's not above board.
Yeah, I think without specs and at least some level of drawings, or you're kind of asking for trouble in a way without having things clearly defined. Just my opinion. Yeah, I'd like to get that stuff in their hands as early in the process as possible. And I understand it could delay some things, but it would be more trouble on the backside from my perspective. Again, another good talking point for the team.
Barbara?
Yeah, real quick. You said, and I just want to make sure I heard it right. You said when you're doing SBE, DVBE, small business, we don't have to take the low bid. Did I hear that right?
That's my understanding. It's the way the government code reads. Obviously, we could go into more research on it and see if there's any applicable case law on it. But most other legislation and all the other procurement codes, including our own, as competitively bid or lowest responsible bidder, that's absent from government code.
Oh, okay. I'll follow up with my procurement folk and see if they decide that's what they believe or not. But I may follow back with you on that. Thank you.
I would think there would have to be some sort of decision matrix, Barbara, to just for PRA to say how do you determine,
right?
That kind of thing. But
yeah. And so, for example, a lot of times we have somebody who has better quality, we know, than the other contractor. And to somebody else's point earlier, we don't always have, full participation from a lot of the smaller businesses, let's say. Even though we're right in the middle of LA, you think we would, but I think a lot of people are busy, and it's just so we end up looking at the quality and who works with the campus the best. So maybe that helps. I don't know, in that matrix, like you're saying.
Yeah, I think as part of the initial bid out, you would have to have a points matrix or some measurable information that you can then compare, because you wouldn't be able to just bring it on at the last minute. All of a sudden you've picked a company and then the other one's wondering why. And you're like, well, I just like them, or they did a great job. But you would have to have something locked in paperwork wise to be able to come up with some sort of point metrics or a reason why they're chosen, not just because.
Well, it becomes best value versus low price, right? And you start getting into a slippery slope when, if you're not defining how you're getting to that best value. I mean, we've all seen it. We all have groups that come and say, oh, well, these are the only guys that can do the work. You start getting into that favoritism thing that I think gets us, into trouble potentially with PRAs and other contracting groups that, now don't want to do work because, hey, so-and-so gives all their work to this group and whatnot there. So I think the easiest way to do that is to not have to go just to the low bid, is to create some type of best value formula for that. Now, what that criteria is really going to depend on what you're really trying to get done at that point.
Yeah, and not to get overly into the weeds, the evaluators would be subject to having to sign a conflict of interest. You can start getting into all other sort of things, but decision matrix, scoring.
And we at our campus do informal bidding on this level of a contract. So having all that overhead kind of defeats us in that sense of quick.
Maybe a simplified best value, and I think that's what's so actually in the DGS contracting manual, they have a pretty big procedure for how they administer out of this code. I haven't read it in a while, but that would be an interesting to do the research on, because it's in that case they're following the same law that we are, whereas most other procurement, we have different laws than they have, so their procurement manual is not always applicable. But sometimes if I'm trying to figure out where there's kind of inconsistencies between laws, or something just doesn't make sense on how I would interpret a law to a procedure, looking at the DGS manual is a good start to at least see what did another group of people in California that have to follow the same law, what did they come up with? So I think that's
helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, is it the SCM, State Contracting Manual, something like that? But yeah, maybe there's room to do a simplified best value, where plug in their safety score, have maybe half the quality points on references and half the quality points on past experiences. But again, part of the reason for this code is to not make small businesses jump through the hoops. And once you start asking to put together proposals and they don't have marketing or a proposal team, then all of a sudden we start pushing them away from being interested in doing our projects. So yeah, we'd have to be creative on how we get those to work. All right. Anything else in our last couple minutes? All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming out today. I think we had a great turnout. I'm excited to see who won the Price is Right. And thank you for everybody who volunteered. So I'll get those people assembled. And then everybody should have it on their calendar. But we do have a training next Tuesday at 1. Where I'll be talking about project versus maintenance. And again, that's going to be specifically for triaging projects for contract type and which procurement procedure to use. So it'll be pretty similar to the one I did at the last law, design, and construction. But for anybody that hasn't seen it yet or wants a refresher, that'll be a good one. And then if you don't have the link, just shoot me an email and I'll make sure you get invited to that training.